Okay, a very good morning to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the third Volunteer Management Network event organized by National Council of Social Service. Today marks the final session of this webinar series, and I hope that all of you have found the sharing useful for you. And it's very encouraging today to see over 100 participants online today, all coming together with a common purpose to strengthen our volunteer management practices and to better support our volunteers and the service users that we all serve. So to recap at the previous Volunteer Management Network series a week ago, we uncover innovative practices and approaches to volunteer management, and we also explore ways to transform volunteers into our core partners for better service user outcomes. And today we will hear from 4 speakers on how data and technology can be used to improve volunteer management practices. So I'd like to introduce the 4 speakers with us today. Firstly, we have Dr. Jess Tan, Senior Lecturer at the School of Business, Singapore University of Social Sciences, Mr. Jeffrey Tay, Deputy Director of Volunteer Management at Samaritans of Singapore, Mr. Conan Teo, Assistant Manager of Community Management at Make-A-Wish Singapore. And lastly, we have Mr. Pong Ming, co-founder of Give.Asia. So all 4 speakers will then join us for a panel Q&A session at the end, and this will be moderated by Ms. Cindy Wong, Senior Manager of the People Development Division at NCSS. So some admin instructions for the panel Q&A session later on. You can use the Zoom Q&A function to put in your questions, and you can also upvote existing ones that you would like to be answered by clicking on the thumbs up symbol. It's because we have a limited time to answer questions, we will first focus on the upvoted questions. And we'll be circulating the slides after the session today via the email that you've used for the registration. And the speaker's contact details will also be in the slides should you wish to contact them directly for any specific questions. So without further ado, let me first introduce our speaker, Dr. Jess Tan from SUSS. Jess brings over 20 years of experience in analytics. She has a strong interest in data mining and its applications, particularly within the non-profit sector, and has worked across a wide range of industries, including consultancy, telecommunications, banking, and entertainment. Jess will show us how organizations can be enabled to move from gut feel to better, more, and sustainable volunteer management through the use of data. Jess, over to you, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I would like to take this opportunity to actually thank NCSS for inviting me for this sharing. So before Jeffrey actually shared the detail of how data was actually used in SOS for enhancing volunteer management, do allow me to share how generally data mining can actually be applied in volunteer management. So to discuss about volunteer, we need to first define who are the volunteers. So a volunteer is someone who perform non-compulsory unpaid work for others. While they are actually unpaid, their contribution is far from small. And globally, volunteers make up to about 61 million of full-time workers. That actually makes them absolutely essential to the sustainability of the social service sector. However, many organizations are also noticing that volunteers are becoming harder to come by. And those who actually remain are often asked to contribute more time. This actually put pressure not just on the volunteers, but also on the staff who actually manage them. Because volunteers are so critical, how can we better manage them actually matters a lot. So research and practice has shown us that poor volunteer management often leads to dropout or turnover, while strong management leads to engagement, efficiency, and adaptability of the volunteers within the organization. Volunteer management is often being modeled after the human resource management practices, from recruitment to retention, but with a very important difference. Volunteers are actually not obliged to stay. They can just go anytime. And that's why effective management is even more important. So as you can see from the chart, volunteer management typically follow a cycle with 4 main stages, from recruitment to training to engagement and to retention. This framework actually comes from the HR management, but it must be adapted to volunteers who are motivated by purpose, values, and personal meaning, rather than pay or promotion. And every stage of this cycle actually represents opportunities for us to better understand and support our volunteers. So what about analytics then? Analytics is actually divided into 4 different key types, each of them are offering increasing value and complexity. First of all, for descriptive analytics, we ask what happened. For example, how many volunteers actually joined or left us last month? As we move out the chain, we have diagnostic analytics that ask, why did this happen? For example, why are actually volunteers dropping out after 3 months? What is wrong? So thirdly, we move to predictive analytics. What's likely to happen next? Who will actually be at risk of leaving the organization in the next 3 months? And finally, we have the prescriptive analytics that actually writes on the predictive analytics, asking questions like, what should we do about it? What are the actions that we can take to improve outcome? And most of the organizations are already doing the first type, which is actually descriptive analytics. However, the opportunity actually lies in gradually moving forward. So at every phase of the volunteer management cycle, data is actually being collected or generated. This could include the application form they fill in, the attendance record, their training records, the hour they serve, or even the survey they actually fill in. But when used thoughtfully, this data actually enables organizations to better understand their volunteers and make informed decisions around targeted recruitment, impactful training, enhanced engagement, and improved retention. So analytics can be applied in many practical ways, such as identifying the right volunteers to join the organization, understanding which training or onboarding practices work best for the volunteers, as well as improving scheduling and deployment that will actually help to enhance volunteer engagement. And most importantly, can we also identify early signs of turnover before they even leave the organization? This insight helps organization to move from actually a reactive problem solving to a proactive volunteer support. So in the case of SOS, we've actually uncovered dormancy and months of services were the key turnover indicator. Demographic factors such as age, gender, marital status did not significantly predict turnover. And this actually implies that volunteering experience rather than their personal background was the primary driver why they are leaving the organization. We also identify that some volunteers are still relatively active before they leave the organization. This actually signifies burnout. It is actually also advisable that we not just look at those who are inactive, but also a need to actually look at the active volunteers as well. So a common concern is that analytics sounds so complex or resource intensive. How should we start doing this? In practice, organization can start small, working with existing data first. You don't need actually massive amount of data to begin. You can start just by analyzing the data you already collected, like the volunteers' hours, the application form that that I was mentioning just now, and you don't need sophisticated tool as well. Actually, Google Sheet, Excel, and all this can also help to actually uncover basic trends. So begin with one focused question. For example, what are the factors that actually influence volunteer retention? As we move to the second point, which is partnering with university or have volunteers with analytics expertise, you can actually think about collaborating with academic institutions or professionals who can actually lend analytics skills. Organization can also consider, engaging data skilled volunteers, and I believe that many professionals are willing to contribute their expertise for social good. Thirdly, it's important to build an internal data literacy. This is to ensure sustainability. Invest in developing data literacy, not just within the IT or the analytics staff, but across teams. We can conduct simple training on how to interpret charts, use dashboard, or even ask data-informed questions. Encourage staff and volunteers leaders to see data as a tool for improvement. Lastly, create sector network for shared learning. Join or create cross-organization networks, such as the Volunteer Engagement Network, to share experience, challenges, and data insights. Collective learning promotes consistency in data practices, and this encourages collaboration instead of duplication. And remember, the goal is progress, not action. It is also important that we acknowledge the ethical and the practical consideration. We must always respect data privacy and informed consent. Volunteers entrust organizations with their personal information, such as the demographic, their records, and even their feedback. Always collect data transparently, explaining what will be collected, why and how it will be used. It's also important to seek informed consent and allow volunteers to opt out. The next is to guard against discrimination in the use of insight. Algorithm and analytics can unintentionally reinforce bias. For example, favoring certain age group, educational level, or background when recommending roles. We need to regularly review data models and decision criteria to ensure fairness and inclusivity. Next, we move on to the interpretation of result with a human context. Number alone is still numbers. It does not tell the full story, such as volunteer motivation, the life event they have went through, or even the emotion cannot be quantified. We need to use insight as a conversational status, not conclusion, and pair data with feedback, observations, and empathy to understand why is this happening now. Lastly, it's important to combine data insight with domain knowledge. Analytics are the most powerful when interpreted by those who understand the social service and the volunteer context. Encourage collaboration between data specialists and volunteer management to co-design the insights and action. Now, data-driven volunteer management actually represents a shift from gut feel to guided intelligence. We need to move beyond intuition decision-making, as data enable volunteers leaders to make evidence-based decisions, and that actually enhance effectiveness and efficiency. It's also a whole organization effort. Data volunteer management is not just the responsibility of one person or one team. It's an organization mindset. Success requires collaboration across departments. Building the data-driven culture is essential, where every staff and volunteer understand the value of data in shaping better experience and decision. And when done well, analytics can support more sustainable and impactful volunteers management. Ensuring resources are allocated effectively such that every volunteer hour creates meaningful value for the beneficiary and also for the organization. Lastly, I want to leave you with this. Data tell the story of our volunteers, their passion, their impact, and as well as their potential. Only by harnessing this insight, we can build stronger connection, make smarter decisions, and amplify our collective impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jess, for your insightful sharing on how our participants can kickstart their journey to use data for impactful volunteer management. So relatedly, it's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Jeffrey Tay, Deputy Director of Volunteer Management from Samaritans of Singapore. So Jeff has been with the volunteer management team at SOS for more than 10 years. He is passionate about strengthening volunteer management practices to keep pace with changing needs, with a focus on strategic planning, process excellence, and deepening volunteer capabilities for longer-term sustainability. So he'll share more about their project Hotline, where they are using a data mining approach to assess the pulse of SOS volunteer pool with the help of SUSS. So over to you, please, Jeff.
Thank you, Janice. And thank you, Jess, for the very informative sharing on data mining and how it actually support and enhance the VM work. Okay. Morning, everyone. So I'm Jeff from the volunteer management team of SOS, currently leading the team in reviewing our SOS VM framework and to ensure that it remains relevant. Okay. So before I start, so just to provide some background on how SOS become involved in this data mining project with SUSS. So collaboration was actually made possible through NCSS, who actually connected us with Dr. Jess from SUSS for this pro bono data mining project. So the aim was to study and analyze our volunteer data so that we can better understand the volunteering trends and patterns within SOS. Okay, so through this collaborations, right, we really hope that we can, enhance our decision-making process. Then eventually maybe develop more targeted strategies, okay, to make it sustainable. I'll just start by giving you a very, very quick introductions of SOS. Okay, we are established 1969, which actually make us 57 years old this year. We are non-religious, not-for-profit organizations. We are dedicated to provide that confidential emotional support to individuals experiencing suicidal crises. In terms of our services, our work centers around three focus areas. First of all, under prevention, we work closely with the community, both within and beyond the mental health sector, to advocate for suicide preventions. Okay, interventions, this is where majority of our volunteers are involved. So it includes our 24 hours hotline, the care tech services, as well as the crisis support and professional counseling. So we also run support group for suicide attempters, known as Light in the Dark. Lastly, under postventions, we provide support to individuals whose loved one died by suicide, where we help them to cope with the grief and loss, which in this context, we actually term them as a suicide survivor. Okay. Without further ado, I'll move on to how we are looking at sustaining volunteerism through the use of data. So essentially moving from like a gut feel approach to one that is really driven by insight. Okay. I actually named this initiative Project Hotline because the idea is that we are using a data mining approach to assess the pulse of our volunteer pool. In simple terms, data mining helps us to identify volunteer profile that actually have the heart to serve, okay, based on the patterns and trends. Okay. The data analysis, right, actually began late October last year. Then the initial findings were shared by Dr. Jess in November. Then December, we have a pause due to the holiday seasons. So right now we are moving into the recommendation stage. So I would like to maybe clarify upfront that this project has just completed the analysis stage. So we have not yet gone into detailed recommendations planning. So today I'm just primarily sharing the experience with this data-driven approach, then how it has inspired the team to maybe rethink and potentially change the way we work, okay? So some of you may be wondering why we choose to explore data mining. Because for SOS, right, volunteers are truly the heartbeat of the organization, which is why the name Project Hotline. Okay, the sustainability of our services, right, actually depends heavily on them. Therefore, actually our planning cannot rely solely on experience and intuitions, which we have always done in the past. So many decisions were made based on personal judgment. So statements such as, I feel that, I think that, so and so on. So while experience is valuable, actually we found that not all of these implementations were effective. So as a result, we actually saw the need to leverage on our existing data to move from the I feel that statements to a more data-driven insight. Okay. Of course, before we move into what story we want the data to tell us, right? We first need to ask ourselves, what are our pain points? Okay. So we have identified two main pain points for Project Hotline, which I believe they are commonly faced by many social service agencies. So the first pain point, recruitment and outreach. So we always ask ourselves, right, which recruitment platform work best? Is there any other factors that were crucial in influencing volunteer uptake? So the underlying issue was actually, yes, yeah, we are recruiting, but are we recruiting right? Okay. Second pain points relates to sustaining volunteer commitment. So while we have new volunteers joining us, many also left over time. So we kind of lack the clarity on the patterns of attritions, like which volunteer profiles require more attention, especially given the operational demands of our services since we are running 24 hours. So at a deeper level, it's about, yes, we know volunteers leave, okay, but who, when, and why, okay? So in order for the data to tell you a meaningful story, actually we need the story character. So in this project, those characters actually refers to your volunteer data. So without data, it would not be possible for any story to emerge. So first of all, what data we have, the demographic profiles of our volunteers, such as their years of service, the sourcing channel, the channel where they hear about SOS volunteering. Then secondly is the duty contributions. So SOS uses a unit-based quota systems, which allow volunteers to track how much they have fulfilled in terms of their service commitment. Okay. So while this data existed within SOS, right, actually much of it was stored in silo, right? So that's why through this project, we actually hope that to transform these fragmented data points into meaningful insights. Okay. So at this point in time, we clean up the data, then we handed them over to our very proficient analysis, Jess, who did an excellent job in making sense of the data. But due to operational sensitivity, I will be sharing only one sample of the finding from the report. Okay. So after the analysis, this slide shows a sample page from the report, which illustrates the proximity of our past and current volunteers. So actually one important point to highlight is that, when conducting data mining, right, actually there's no need to use identifiable personal information. Okay, so for example, for examining of whether proximity plays a big part in volunteer update, we only provided the district level postal code. So we didn't provide the full home address. So similarly, volunteers' name were all anonymized and replaced with anonymized IDs. So this approach actually allows us to, analyze meaningful patterns while ensuring compliance with PDPA requirements. Okay, so you can see from this sample report, actually SOS volunteer comes from all around Singapore. Okay. So at this point in time, you may be wondering, okay, so what Project Highlight has actually revealed? Okay, what stories did the data tell us? Okay, so in a nutshell, there were three key insights that stood out. So in terms of recruitment channels, we realized that the data shows a clear difference between the two different volunteering roles. Most of our hotline volunteers learn about SOS through traditional media, for example, like press release. Then on the other hand, CareTax volunteers were most likely to hear about SOS through non-traditional channels, particularly the social media platforms like Instagram, maybe Facebook, etc. Okay. Secondly, actually data revealed a higher withdrawal rate among the younger and single volunteers. Many of them actually tend to leave after fulfilling the minimum of 2 years commitment. I mean, this was often linked to like life stage transitions, like example, starting a new job or maybe pursuing further education. Actually, this insight was something like a light bulb moment for us because it prompted us to think more intentionally about how we might better support and retain this group of volunteers at this stage of life. Yeah. Thirdly, proximity was found not to be a key factor because they come from all around Singapore. Actually, we do have volunteers who actually travel from Sembawang all the way to Cantonment and still remain committed. So instead, the data suggested that the quality of the volunteering experience plays a more significant role. So this kind of like signal a need for SOS to continue strengthen our engagement strategy to support that long-term retention. So in a nutshell, actually, we realized that data mining allow us to first, identify the patterns. Then second, move one step backwards, maybe from addressing the what happened to understanding why it may have happened. And also it helps to uncover insights, that would have been difficult to observe through human eyes or manual review or purely intuition alone. Okay. So how do we intend to use this data insight to move towards recommendations and planning phase? So I share a few examples of how the findings actually already shaping our thinking. So first of all, the data actually reinforced that for recruitment, right, there is no one-size-fits-all approach. So this has prompted us to, relook at our recruitment strategy more holistically. So maybe balancing between both traditional and non-traditional channels so that we can better reach the different potential volunteer pool. Then secondly, is about revisiting our volunteer model. So as all of us are aware, volunteering trends have evolved. People are getting busier and busier. So this has led us to consider offering greater flexibility, maybe, such as a bite-sized volunteering options instead of relying primarily on like a fixed block shift volunteering options. Okay. And lastly, the insight have kind of like prompted us to revisit on how we engage volunteers, maybe more purposefully. So we are reflecting whether our past engagement efforts will focus more on output rather than outcomes, and whether they truly meet the needs of volunteers. Of course, while VM team recruits, if we equip them and we deploy them, it is still the program staff who work closely with them. So moving forward, we are also exploring how we can foster a culture where everyone actually see themselves as a volunteer manager. So from the on-the-job experience, where we look at support and experiences, to organizational-wide practices where we can look at inclusivity as well as heightening the sense of belongings. Okay. We don't have all the answer yet, but the data has given us like a clearer direction on where we need to focus. Okay. So through Project Hardline, actually the team was genuinely inspired by the data insight shared by Dr. Jess from SUSS. So it really helped us realize the importance of using data to ground our decisions. So in fact, rather than relying primarily on feelings or assumptions, so in other words, it allowed us to shift from always assuming to having evidence to support our planning. Yeah. Then in that case, it also helps us to minimize the statement of I feel that and I think that. Okay. Data mining also enable us to move from like a reactive approach, where we wait for issue to surface before responding, to a more intentional planning. So for example, if we know, okay, right now we know that average volunteering spans of a younger and single volunteer is around 2 years. So this allows us to proactively think about what changes we can make to maybe better support them in order to retain them. Okay. So in a nutshell, the data-driven approach allow us to work smarter and sharper. So not just working harder. But having said that, we still need to work hard. But now we can actually work hard with a clearer directions and purpose. Okay. So moving forward, what will be our focus? So our focus will be more on strengthening how data can be used to support VM planning. So this will include ensuring data quality and consistency, so that the insights that you generated, can be reliable and meaningful. We also intend to make greater use of data and insights, maybe to translate them to intelligence, supporting evidence-based planning decisions, rather than relying assumptions or past practices. Okay. And lastly, perhaps we can look at building capabilities, training relevant internal stakeholders in data analytics will help ensure that the insights are well understood and effectively applied in the planning process. And if possible, we will certainly be happy to invite Jess again to continue guide us as a coach. Okay. So with that, I'll end my presentation. I'll pass the time back to Janice. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing your experience in adopting a data mining evidence-based approach, which is very useful for SOS to address challenges faced in engaging and retaining volunteers. And there are many great takeaways from your presentation. So moving on, let me now invite Mr. Conan Teo, Assistant Manager of Community Management from Make-A-Wish Singapore. Conan started his journey as a volunteer more than 10 years ago. He wears many hats within the organization, but is also the dedicated person that manages the volunteers for the organization. Conan will share how the volunteer management practices at Make-A-Wish are shaped by data. And he also hopes to inspire all of us here today to embrace data with a little more faith. So over to you, please, Conan.
Thank you, Janice. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Let me just share a little bit about the organization first so that you get a bit of context of what Make-A-Wish does. Basically, we are a wish granting organization that grants wishes for kids with critical illness. We've been in Singapore for about 24 years this April. And some of the kids that we serve are all the kids that we serve are between the ages of 3 to 18 years old. they would have been diagnosed with a critical medical condition, and also they have to be a part of the Singapore community. That's how we kind of qualify the kids for the wishes lah. So in 2025, we actually granted our highest number of wishes within a year, which is 140. So that was a milestone for us. It was also another milestone was actually our volunteer numbers. We actually hit our highest number of volunteers, which is 276. So essentially, our volunteers are really key lifelines to us because they are the ones that actually work on granting the wishes for us. A little bit more about myself, just to add on to what Janice has mentioned, I've been in the sector for about 10 plus years already, and I started my time as a volunteer with Make-A-Wish actually. I've been with the organization for about 8 years now, and over the 8 years, my job scope has evolved, and I am currently the dedicated VM person in the organization. So I work with the various teams to look at the different volunteer roles. And I'm also part of the programs team, which is a good thing because, then I get to work with the main bulk of the volunteers. At the same time, get to have inputs into the program as well. And I'm always constantly pushing for digitalization. So last year we had an internal digital audit. We worked very closely with one of our advisors who actually helped us with looking at our different tech tools and things like that, and also so that we can better cut away things that we do not really need. Why this is important is because when you talk about data and things like that, sometimes the tech tools that are available to you is actually kind of important as well. So I think that was something that was what was important to me in 2025. So just a bit of background about the type of volunteers that we have within the organization. So most of our volunteers are known as wish granters, 85% of them. They are the ones that actually work purely on the wishes, to plan the wishes and to execute the wishes. A handful of them are actually medical students that come from NTU and NUS. We actually engage the two different schools. So that is a volunteer partnership that we have with the two schools. And on top of that, we also have another group of wish granters known as wish mentors. So these are the very experienced wish granters who have been with the organization for many years, who have granted many, many assignments. So these are our key wish mentors. On top of that, we have volunteers that actually help us with our communications and marketing department. They actually help us with creative, photo takings, our social media, etc. So this is about 8.3% of them. And we also have a partnership with the youth core team where their media volunteers come in and actually help us with our creative volunteer role. We have a couple of our volunteers who are actually known as event volunteers who help out with events. And then also we have a relatively new volunteer role known as a Wish Alumni Volunteer, our WAVE volunteers. So as of last year, we have the highest active rate of volunteers at 94%. When we talk about active rate, we essentially mean that our volunteers are super active last year. If you look at it, actually, there might have been a correlation between the activity rate of our volunteer versus the number of wishes that we granted from last year. So there could have been a correlation there, but it's not very strong, I know, but at the same time, maybe it is, right? So yes, that's a story to tell, as what Jeffrey has mentioned. So some of the tools that we use is actually fairly straightforward. We actually engage Microsoft Dynamics 365 on some of our major tools. So first and foremost, our emails, our CRM, our data management, right? Where our wishes are in, our donors are in, where our volunteers are in, all within one system, which is under the Microsoft Dynamics 365. We also use the OneDrive, where it's also part of this Microsoft Dynamics 365, where we do our file sharing, our storage, and our archivals. And then that's where we do our calls as well. So we don't have to separately have, another tool where we have to pay more for subscription, for example. And last but not least, we also have our Wish app, which I will go a little bit more in depth into. But essentially, this is an app that is dedicated for our Wish granters, and it is also connected to our database. So that's why it falls under this Dynamics 365 pillar. Other type of tools that we actually use is DocuSign. DocuSign is a tool where we get our signing stuff settled. We have Cognito forms, where all of our forms are actually situated. Through our internal audit, we actually put all our forms together in one space, and every department has access into that space. So that's a little bit more aligned with the entire organization. MYOB for our financial stuff. Google Drive, which is fairly straightforward. And then Twilio. Twilio is a tool where we use to send messages out to our families and to our volunteers and stuff like that. So these are essentially the tools that we use for when it comes to our tech stuff. So the Wish app, as I mentioned earlier, was something that's dedicated for our Wish granters. We developed it in 2022 and then we launched it in 2023. So it's very new. This is essentially the app where all our Wish granters get to gain access into When we assign them an assignment, this is how they look in. This is where they look into the data of the assignments that have been given to them. They can keep track of the activities and tasks along the way. They also can gain resources that can actually help them throughout their volunteering journey. At the same time, this also keeps track of how many assignments they take on, etc., etc. And they are also able to go inside to actually take on new assignments. So all these things are actually linked to our database in our CRM. So that's where I actually look into it to actually gain more insights into the usage of the Wish app as well. So of course, when we talk so much about data and things like that, right, it's important to talk about security as well. This is an important priority for us, right? It should always be an important priority for any organization that looks into data. As Jeffrey has mentioned, right, when he looks into his data, he also needs to make sure that things are properly hidden like they need to be. Okay, it's important to invest in the required tools and required skills. Get people involved if you need some skills involved, like how SOS has actually engaged SUSS, right? And then also importantly, this is not a static feature, right? There are always new scammers coming into the picture trying to do funny things. So as an organization, it's important to always remember that this is not a static feature. You must always keep evolving as well. Okay. Just to share a little bit more about the kind of forms that we actually use. For me, myself, I actually classify my forms as two different types. The first and foremost will be our recruitment forms, right? When you talk about data, you need to talk about collecting your data, and through your recruitment forms, we actually collect, things like your personal data, how to contact our volunteers, their address, things like that. We also need to make sure that they go through provide us their legal history, sign the conflict of interest, etc., etc. So these are quite basic stuff that hopefully most of the SSAs will already have. Of course, this will help us with compliance issues, accountability, right? Sometimes it's important that volunteers go through all this process and sign the required forms, just so that they know that, hey, I'm officially a volunteer with this organization, etc., etc. Right? The next kind of forms that we look at are the feedback forms that volunteers actually fill up. So we actually have many different touch points with our active volunteers, especially our wish granters, right? After they finish their training, after they finish their first wish with us, even when they exit, we also get them to fill up an exit form just to get insights of why they're leaving, right? And every year we also will dish out this annual feedback form for all our volunteers just to find out a little bit more. So I'll go a little bit more in depth into this annual feedback form later. So these kind of forms are really to gather voices, to gather opinions, to gather insights, right? To hear a little bit more about our volunteers, from our volunteers. And it's also for us to reinforce certain things that perhaps we already have an inkling of why things are happening a certain way. And then these kind of forms actually help us see whether or not, this is the kind of, whether or not we are actually thinking about the certain thing in a certain way. So after we've collected the data, of course, we need to talk about how we want to tell the story, right, of the data that we have collected. So importantly, it's to figure out how much data we need to collect and when we need to collect our data. So personally, for me, I do two kinds of data collection, monthly as well as annually. So this is really for me to keep track of things, and then also for me to put reports together every single month as well as one entire year. So every year I will have a VM report for the entire organization, and then also every month I will have a VM report for the CEO. This is really to track and plan stuff, and then of course to analyze things. And sometimes we need to figure out who exactly these numbers are going to, and the story, who are you telling this story to, right? Is it the staff? Is it board? Are there external parties involved? Sometimes it's important to work with the correct team, correct colleague to paint the correct picture. Okay, so I'm going to go into a few different VM practices that are actually affected by the data that we collect. So first and foremost, I just want to talk about our recruitment process. Our data actually is very important for us to figure out how many kinds of, what kind of volunteers do we need to recruit, right? The profile we need and stuff like that. So for us, so for example, when we look at age group, we can see how many type of, where do most of our wish granters come from, for example, right? Or where do most of our volunteers come from? As you can see, we have a lot of our volunteers are within a chunk of between 21 to 40, 50. So it's really all the working adults that come in to volunteer with us. So when we want to recruit, we also target that group. When it comes to gender, as you can see, we have very little males that are actually volunteering with us. So this also means that when we want to recruit, we also target the men. So that's how we use the data, right, to inform us of who we need to recruit every single time we have a recruitment cycle. So that's the first, recruitment. Secondly, when we talk about our Wish app, the app that I showed you earlier, we always look into the user data. So every single month, I actually get a report from the app developers, and they actually tell me, you know, how many people download the app and things like that. So of course, when we don't have a new batch of volunteers that join us, I shouldn't see any downloads lah. So if I see weird downloads happening like in some random places, then I know something is wrong, right? Then I will have to speak to my developers. So things like that are important to us. At the same time, every single year when we dish out our annual volunteer survey, there's a portion where it's dedicated to the Wish app, where we actually ask the volunteers, right? How do you feel about the Wish app this year? Was there anything that we could improve on, right? For example, in 2025, I think most of the feedback that we received about the Wish app is actually about the budgeting of the budget data that they actually can access within the Wish app. Right? Volunteers want to be able to, let's say, see more things about the Wish budget. So then as a team, coming into this year, we already discussed that we want to be able to speak with the finance team so that we can have a more integrated process, just so that the Wish granters and the volunteers can have more visibility, right, to the budgets that they should have visibility to. Okay. Okay, next one is trainings and workshops. I think this is fairly straightforward. Every time when we talk to our volunteers and things like that, we actually gather the feedback of what they actually want, right? What kind of trainings they want to look into. We want to be able to tailor to different segments of volunteers and to be able to help them feel that they are more equipped to be able to volunteer with us, right? For example, things like creativity or how to manage families, etc. So these are the kind of data that actually helps us inform what kind of training we want to be able to dish out for our volunteers. So again, this kind of feedback and data is actually collected through our annual volunteer survey responses. So these are the kind of responses that we actually receive from our 2025 survey. At the same time, we also gather this kind of feedback from our families. Every single wish that we grant, we actually have a wish satisfaction survey. So when we hear from the volunteers, we also hear from the beneficiaries, right? Like how satisfied are you with the volunteers? Was there something you need to tell us, etc. So it's a two-prong kind of thing lah. Okay, last but not least, we talk about volunteers' impact. So I think this is very relatively new, I would say, in this last couple of years. And we actually work very closely with NCSS to come up with a volunteer impact measurement kit, I think last year where it was launched. So this was particularly exciting because when we were involved, we also gathered insights of how we can, measure volunteer impact, right? I mean, after all, volunteers are giving their time and their efforts into helping the organization. So that's why for us, we actually, when we built our annual volunteer survey, we actually relied quite a lot on this library that's available on the NCSS website. And we actually put it into our volunteer survey. Or the type of questions we put into our volunteer survey help us gather data that we could actually use to inform us about our volunteer management practices, right? So for example, 82% of our volunteers tell us that they had a positive experience volunteering with us. So then we know, a lot of our volunteers are happy, right? For those who are not happy, then perhaps we will find out a little bit more in the qualitative part of the survey where they actually give us a little bit more insights about what they're thinking about. It also gives us an indication, right, of the short-term and long-term volunteering. Like if you see the last two questions within the volunteer survey, it's a little small, but essentially we ask them, do you intend to continue volunteering with us within the next 1 year? Do you intend to continue volunteering with us within more than a year from now? So then we get an indication. So that's also something to think about. And yeah, that's all I have to share with everyone today. Thank you for listening and being here. I think I just want to wrap up by saying that data is just data, but you need to put together the quantitative and the qualitative to be able to tell the story that you want to be able to tell. And don't be afraid of it. It's really a full circle moment. Sometimes volunteers are the ones that help you collect the data, right? Like for us, the volunteers are actually the ones that dish out the wish satisfaction survey to the families, for example. So it's really a full circle when volunteers are in the picture, and data should be the one that help you enhance what you need to do for the volunteers and for the beneficiaries. So thank you.
Thank you, Conan, for a generous sharing on how Make-A-Wish leverages various tech solutions to inform your volunteer engagement, and also very kindly sharing the kind of data that you collected from your volunteers to inform on your work. So our next speaker is Mr. Ming, co-founder of Give.Asia. So Give.Asia started in 2009 with a simple belief inspired by Gandhi, right? That when more people choose to give, we build a kinder society for our children. So his work focuses on making it easier for people to donate, volunteer, and for them to keep coming back to do good. So Ming will share his views of the everyday challenges of managing volunteers and how simple systems, including AI, can help to reduce admin work and also improve coordination and help the volunteers to stay engaged. Over to you, please, Ming.
All right, thanks, Janice. Yeah, it's been a really good sharing session. I guess everyone has learned a lot today. I mean, we all wish to have the kind of retention rate that Conan has shared, 94%. Yeah, that's like pretty amazing that Make-A-Wish has done. For today itself, I'll do a pretty quick run through. I guess the first part is just to do a bit of introduction about what Give.Asia is about, and then I'll walk through some of the technologies that we built around the volunteer management part of it. So just a quick introduction, myself, Ming. Me and my friends kind of started this in university in 2009. And since then, we've mostly been focusing on helping charities with fundraising. Today, we have been doing this for about 17 years now. So our motivation has kind of changed over time from just getting ourselves involved to trying to build a better community for our children. Everything we do kind of stem from the core belief that got us started. We didn't just want to complain about things that are bad around the world. We wanted to kind of get ourselves involved to kind of affect some sort of change if we can actually contribute positively. Basically, we wanted to be volunteers, but we wanted to find a way to volunteer that actually works for us. So the way that works best for us was to volunteer our skills in building technology. And since then, we've built technology around donations, fundraising, event management, and volunteers. And everything we do, because we come from a volunteer point of view, everything is done for free. We have basically a bunch of friends from university days and from our workspace. We come from different startups and tech startups across the world, and we've mostly been contributing our time in design and engineering. Just to reiterate again, today we help about 500 to 600 charities in Singapore alone with different sorts of technology needs, and everything we do is free. All right, so this is just a quick snapshot of what we are today. About 2 million people use our platform on a yearly basis. All right, I guess for today's topic itself, the origin started about a year and a half ago. Primarily for the first 15 odd years, we've been focused on helping nonprofits with fundraising, thinking that if we can just help the nonprofits more money, that will solve a lot of the problems that nonprofit has. But over time, nonprofits kind of reached out to us and told us that maybe it'd be good if we can do something about helping them retain talent as well, or maybe engaging more people to volunteer for the organizational costs. When we look into this problem and we check out what was happening across the world, we realized that actually volunteering fundamentally wasn't broken. Majority of the people, if we were to ask them, would you be willing to give some of your time to actually do some good? Most of them would be quite ready in terms of responding, saying that they will. The problem has always been about coordination. I'm willing to do it, but I can't do it this weekend. I'm willing to do it, but I don't know what I'm suitable for. I'm willing to do it, but I don't know if I'm needed. So a lot of this comes from having good intentions, but not necessarily being able to deploy the intentions to actions. So there are a couple of things that we try to look at as well. From the other side, we see that most nonprofits are actually very overloaded. There's so much work to do, and volunteer managers have a very tough job. Basically, you have to coordinate across multiple types of platforms, from WhatsApp, emails, spreadsheets, messages, forms, all kinds of things. And all sorts of matching are kind of done by memory or based on what's needed most urgently at the moment. Tracking and reporting involves a lot of chasing after data, a lot of trying to upload spreadsheets, merging them, and then at the end of the day, trying to get some sort of feedback from the participants, mostly centered around. They tend to have more feedbacks when it's negative feedback, but most of the time, the positive feedback is failed to be captured. So when we look at all this stuff, we wanted to build a sort of platform that would actually reduce the load on the nonprofits. And what we wanted to focus on was to take the best practices of what we see in terms of user-generated content. We see that on all sort of review sites, it was very common for the participants themselves or to actually contribute new information, to keep it fresh, to share the perspective, to enrich the data, and so forth. Yep. So what we have built been something they've been rolling out through all the volunteer centers across Singapore. The idea here was that if we could actually have data be an infrastructure and not require additional work. As much as possible, we want to collate information that's useful to kind of help with matching, to reduce administrative burden, to kind of help with retention of volunteer, but do all these things in an automated fashion such that it doesn't require the volunteer managers to do additional work. So we built this particular infrastructure that I can walk through a demo if you're interested in it in terms of reaching out. But what it does is we try to apply something a little bit different. We kind of base everything that we have around the idea that if we can create a better volunteer experience, that would also help the nonprofits in terms of volunteer retention. So when we asked ourselves, majority of the volunteers who are volunteering for the first time, their biggest blocker was not knowing where their interests are and what they would like to do. And oftentimes what we realize is that if we can make it a little bit gamified, we can make it such as a bit interesting in terms of trying to figure out what sort of volunteer profile you're in. If you were to answer some questions, you get a little bit of suggestions saying that most likely you're a befriender type. And then from there itself, through the registration process, try to streamline it to be as few clicks as possible, as minimal data as we can, as much as we can, we take it contextually. For example, if we know that they're interested in befriending, most likely they're interested in elderly care, they're more interested in communication skills, so we can kind of build a little bit of mapping in terms of their interests and skill base. So all these things we try to generate almost behind the scenes in the background so that it's contextual and helpful for the volunteer manager without having to add additional workload for volunteer management. Yep. So another thing that we kind of try to tackle is the idea that oftentimes volunteering is seen a bit of a sacrifice, even though doing good actually makes you feel good. Most people don't have that experience going into volunteering because they actually feel that at the end of the volunteering, they are only asked to volunteer again and again, but there's no moments of appreciation, certification, or maybe giving some sort of rewards. So what we built is try to kind of get together the whole Singapore community to see whether we can do anything better. We try to build a system that generates the certificates automatically on behalf of the NGOs so they don't have to do additional work. At the same time, we partner with merchants across Singapore to kind of reward the volunteers that if they were to go to different F&B outlets, they'll get free drinks, they'll get 10% off on their deals and so forth. So that essentially we're trying to close the loop in terms of volunteer experience so that they have a better and more rewarding time. Yep. So that's all I'm going to share about, I guess, our perspective in terms of volunteer management. We've always tried to think about it that most nonprofits today don't really need to be 100% data driven because it does require a fair bit of work. What we want to do is kind of provide something that's a bit more data supported in a way. You have contextual information, but doesn't require additional work. And hopefully that will kind of nudge it in terms of the next step in terms of where NGOs should move towards. Yeah, that's it on my part. Yeah, thanks, Janice.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Ming, for sharing on how Give.Asia can support participants with data to inform their volunteer management practices. So now that we have heard from all four of our speakers here today, let me now invite them back to join us for the panel Q&A segment. Ms. Cindy Wong from NCSS will be moderating the Q&A. Do note that we will address questions with the most upvotes. And if you have any specific questions that we may not have addressed in today's Q&A session, you may please feel free to email the speakers directly. Okay, over to you, Cindy.
Thank you, Janice. Everybody can hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, we have quite an active Q&A chat going as you were presenting. Let's start with an interesting question that has quite a few upvotes, which is, well, is there really a need for data? Really? Because it doesn't, well, this particular person say that it doesn't sound like there's anything unique. So is there really a need to put in so much effort to do data mining, analysis? So maybe we start with Jess. What's your view on that? And then Jeff to answer, and maybe Conan? Jess, over to you.
Okay. I think it's quite a spot on that, many of the insights are actually aligned with the broader trend that we already observe in volunteering today. But actually alignment is not a weakness, right? In that sense but it's actually an important validation in that sense that we are seeing that what we have been looking at or what I've been thinking about, actually the data also support that. And the value of actually data mining and analysis effort is actually not just to look at something new. I'm not trying to do, uncovery many new things, but also at the same time to be grounded to what we think we know in evidence is actually local, current, actionable, and that also that actually allow us to the data actually allow us to understand how, why, and for whom is actually happening in this context. And because without a very systemic way of looking at the data, we are just relying a lot on our assumptions, our gut feel, and all this. And these are not actually fully validated in that sense. Okay, so this effort actually help us to quantify the strengths and the skills of the trends that we are currently seeing, identify the noises, the stark segment that actually broad narrative also often missed. And of course, we then, the way that SOS is looking at it, they are actually doing a prioritization also to see where do I place my resources now that I know all this, and establish a baseline that, when there are future change and intervention, it can actually be meaningfully evaluated. So having said that, I'm just trying to illustrate that, data mining can be used in the social service sector to help to validate and of course to bring data alive in that sense to tell story. In terms of the effort and all this, there's definitely effort, but the thing is we are trying to work with existing data also. Yeah, okay, to you, Jeff.
Hey, thank you, Jess. I think it's a fair observations because some of the quantitative insight, especially, actually kind of like aligns with the volunteering trend. I agree with Jess. So when you look into data-driven approach, right, it's not about you want to find something unique, you want to change the way you work, but it's also about validations. So take for instance, we do implement post-mortem survey for every activity. Okay, why do we do that? Because we want to validate that the directions that we are going is actually what the volunteers in preference of. Yeah. So this kind of like a small little sample data collection, right, actually allow us to move from, as I mentioned earlier, from assumption to kind of become like an evidence base that yes, we are kind of like moving the right directions. Otherwise, we will risk like designing programs, right, then based on like trends rather than our volunteers' preference and or otherwise their life experience. So it actually help us to kind of like validate that our interventions are justified. Yeah. So this is my thought.
But I think when I heard you, Jess, there was this point about it's not just about proximity. I remember you mentioned in your presentation, like somebody could travel from one end of Singapore to the other end of Singapore just to volunteer because they believe in the cause. So maybe that was a myth that some people might have in their minds, and the data actually disproves it. Yeah, Conan, over to you. What are your views about this? Is it important?
I think sometimes it's not about what is being collected, it's also how it is being collected. By the mere fact that you're collecting data and feedback from volunteers goes to show that you care, right? The organization cares. And I think that's in itself very important already. So that's one thing to highlight. And I think sometimes, and it can actually be very straightforward and very simple in asking people, how do you feel about this assignment that you just completed and things like that. These are also small data that is important to, write down or take note of. And then I think this process of so-called data collection being too tedious, just start small somewhere, and then slowly you will feel a little bit more comfortable with the numbers. And yeah, after that, you will feel more comfortable with the bigger numbers, I guess.
Okay. Ming, you thought you can sit this out, but decided to give you the floor. Any thoughts on your end? So have you guys used data in the way you design your portal, your platform, your interface with the volunteers?
I think the first wave of the platform that we launched out came out around the middle of last year. And after 6 months or so, we saw how the user interacted with it. And we realized that trying to funnel people to activity-specific or organization-specific roles might be a little bit challenging upfront. So one of the key differences that we did was that we kind of crawled through all the activity listings across all the NGOs across Singapore and kind of group them, right? And then when we started grouping them, we realized it was much easier for volunteers to get started. Yeah, instead of saying that I want to be a befriender for elderly for this particular organization, they can just join a befriender role. And then from a befriender role, we expose them to different nonprofits, different activity types, different causes and categories, beneficiary groups. So that becomes a step-by-step in terms of guiding them through the process. Yeah. So for us, we've always used data in terms of redesigning the product itself.
Nice. Thank you very much. Okay, I saw another question. It was more about, well and good to, they probably already believe in the importance of collecting data, but there seems to be some sort of fatigue as well. How do you kind of manage that fatigue? Honestly, we face it too. We have hundreds of people signing up for this network sessions, but when we ask for feedback at the end, we don't get a lot of responses as well. So yeah, so any thoughts on that? How do you kind of tackle this challenge of survey question fatigue? Maybe we start with Jeff this time.
Me? Me,
Yes.
right? Okay. No, Jess and Jeff a bit similar.
Oh,
Yeah,
Jeff.
that's why sometimes okay. Actually, it's valid concern lah. For us, we ever experience survey fatigue as well. Yeah. So, which is why we talk about it, and we wanted to shift from more survey to maybe like a smarter data collection. Yeah. So yes, we can actually do survey, but of course your survey must be purpose driven so that the volunteers will understand why you are doing this. So your intention must be clearly communicated. So we have kind of changed. So our practice is a biannual survey where we actually have it's a long survey which we will do once in 2 years. But of course, in order to continue to collect data, right, we cannot always do the long annual survey. So what we do is that pulse survey. So we ask like questions every bi-monthly. We actually send our weekly emails to update volunteers of the happening. So from there, we actually included a pulse survey, maybe 1 or 2 questions to find out their sentiments. After that, follow up with a focus group discussion. So it's a different mood. So the volunteers will understand that after getting a quantitative data, you need qualitative data. Yeah. But very importantly, when we do survey, right, in order to avoid survey fatigue, we must kind of like give volunteers the confidence that action is taken. So that for future survey, they're more willing to provide their input. Yeah, so that is what our strategy is in when it comes to collecting data.
Conan, you were nodding. So
Yeah,
is that how you do it? How you try to fight this fatigue, and what are the other ways that you have done so?
I absolutely love what Jeffrey said. You must show that action is being taken based on the feedback that they've given you. Otherwise, they won't feel like, they need to give you their feedback. I think some pointers that I have for fatigue, right, is to really direct the survey, I would say, but when you direct a survey to someone, make sure that the person feels like, hey, I'm the only person who can provide you this data, so that they feel a little bit more special when it comes to providing their feedback. Right. At the same time, we also, when we want to collect like bigger data, I suppose, we do it at one time. We don't like break it up into so many different times and just at one go, settle one time in that sense. Then you collect a lot of things out of one particular survey. For example, like our annual survey, when we do it once a year, it's really just one time only. Don't over collect data that you don't really need. I mean, there's no such thing as useless data, but at the same time, if you don't need it at this point in time, maybe don't need to collect. So then that's just some of the things. Another thing I think that has helped is that we keep the time open for a longer period of time when it comes to collecting your data. So give yourself a little bit more time to do data collection, like in that sense. Yeah. So our annual survey, for example, if we want our data to be ready by, let's say, end January, when I give out my VM report, I make sure that I administer the data as early as late November or even mid-November. Yeah.
And Jess, any other like best practices when it comes to actually getting data?
I think what they have mentioned is correct. It has to be purposefully driven. You cannot just have a survey for the sake of having a survey. And the thing is, in a way, my view is that, do a survey try not to have to everyone, but do targeted, like for SOS, they kind of like know that, it's the young people, the single who are actually leaving us. And if you really want to find out more about certain thing, we just do a very targeted poll with 5 questions and all this, which is a simple to answer. And if people face this fatigue, is because there's so many questionnaire, and then what do you actually want from me? They get this confusion as well. And then the thing is, if you have open-ended questions, it's even worse. You're thinking, what should I be writing, and all this? Can I be negative and all this? But if you have like more like a skill a survey, which is easy to click, people are more likely to do it than to have an open-ended survey that you get people opinions and things like that. So I think the design of the survey is also very important. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. You mean, I think there was one question that was directed at you specifically about maybe differences between Give.Asia and volunteer.sg. Would you like to address that one?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, I mean, firstly, I think volunteer.sg is doing a good job, right? The idea here is not to replace volunteer.sg, but rather to complement it. I think volunteer.sg does the best job in terms of activating people in the government sector to volunteer, right? Especially for MOH and MOH activities. But in our case, I think we're targeting more towards a younger crowd, or maybe a more corporate crowd, people who are relatively new segments to volunteering. And the entry point for majority of them are a little bit different. They're looking for something which is a little bit easier to get started, to kind of wet their toes before they actually commit for much longer term. So we focus a lot more on getting people to start their giving journey, and hopefully from there cultivate them towards time. Yeah.
And I would say that
Mhm.
I think there are different platforms, and just like there are different SSAs. I think it's just a matter of maybe putting as much options out there so that
Yep.
Whoever wants to volunteer would be able to volunteer and make that less of a maybe a task for them. But I think a lot of people volunteer just because family members or friends are volunteering.
Yep.
So that is actually if I'm not wrong, we need data to substantiate that. Yeah, so as long as we have as many platforms, as many ways for people to come and join and volunteer, that would be great. So the other group of questions would be about types of survey questions specifically. So I think when it comes to qualitative questions, survey forms and all that, but how about qualitative questions? How, like Jeff, you mentioned there is a focus group. What kind of questions have you used, especially when it comes to volunteer retention? I think that question was more about volunteer retention. What kind of qualitative questions you would use to kind of find out about that?
Actually, it's a valid question because I mean, VM practitioner are very, very busy, so we don't want to collect data that is like for the sake of collecting. But actually, my view is when you look at qualitative data, right? So maybe it's more useful to look at to start with what kind of story that you like the data to tell you. Because every data, as Jess mentioned earlier, actually should serve a purpose. So for example, when we look at volunteer retentions, so where we had focus group discussions, so of course the data you prioritize is definitely volunteer satisfactions. Yeah, so that's one. Or otherwise, volunteer sentiments, volunteers' experience, your support during the on-the-job volunteering role. Yeah. So in my view, the essential data, regardless is quantity or quality, depends on the outcome, the story that you're trying to get, the outcome that you're trying to improve. Yeah,
Okay, so you start from the outcome, then you think about the questions,
correct.
right?
Mm.
Okay, anything to add? Anyone? Feel free.
I
Yeah.
think it's a little bit dangerous sometimes to kind of make too much insights from a sample set that's too small, because it's very easy to bias it, right? So actually, I think MCCY did invest in a pretty good survey that's done once every 2 years, the individual giving survey. In it itself, I think the last report in 2023, it did mention qualitatively when they were sampling across the whole Singapore by different demographic age groups and interest base, what are the main motivation drivers and what are the key factors that kind of drive the experience. Yeah. So in the absence of being able to do a proper survey, maybe just referencing something that's more representative of whole Singapore would be a good enough benchmark to begin with.
I think the very first network session, for those of you who have participated, we did share some landscape sector-wide kind of data. Janice did that presentation. We have actually sent out that particular recording and all the decks. So that is more like a kind of Singapore-wide kind of data that you can refer to. Then the other thing that I would also like to ask everyone is this thing about collecting data. This question came up before today. What kind of data do you collect to kind of impress a corporate partner? What would a corporate partner be interested in from your point of view? And what kind of data have you collected to show kind of your effectiveness? Maybe we start with Conan this time.
So for us, we do actually occasionally have corporate volunteers that actually come and engage us for different activities or any activation. And every single time there's a particular big group corporate volunteering and experience, we would often gather the feedback as well. Yeah, so then we will also use that feedback to help shape the next engagement, I would say. And that's usually what we do when it comes to how we engage corporates. At the same time, I think what's very, very, very important is that corporates want impact reports. So they want to know how their involvement has affected the beneficiaries, how their involvement can benefit their employees, right? So if their employees were to be involved. So these are just some of the two. I think this is the two key points for me when it comes to corporates and their involvement on the VM side of things. So this is how I look at it, lah. Yeah.
Jeffrey, anything to add? What kind of data have you extracted or presented to corporate?
Because for us, right now we are tapping on individuals. So due to the nature of the role, so we didn't move ahead with corporate volunteers for now.
But maybe corporate partners or fundraising?
Yeah, but if you ask me, I think it's the clarity of the value. So for my personal view, the more crucial data is about the outcome that the partnership is meant to achieve. Yeah. So for example, some of the engaging corporates, they may be looking at client impact, such as how has this particular initiative improved their life. So data that you may want to collect might be a pre and post programs. Some people may look at volunteer centric outcomes, so such as their skills development. So before the initiative or the program, how did the volunteers feel then versus after? So I thought, yeah, this may be like a strong indicator if, let's say, you are looking at long-term partnership with corporate volunteers, with corporate partners. Yeah.
Before and after. You mean you're nodding? Is that what you're thinking of also?
I think for us, we have a little bit more of a practical approach to corporate volunteering. I think from a majority of corporates, we assume that they want one of two things, or maybe a combination of both. So they either do volunteering because it's an employee engagement, so they're looking for internal metrics, or they're doing it for cost marketing, so for branding purposes, right? So there's external metrics, right? Yeah. So even for external cost marketing, majority of the time they want it to be a story worth telling, right? So essentially, if it is good photo op opportunity, that's great, right? If it's a very concise, easy to understand story of impact, that's very good as well. If it's too complex, it makes it a little bit hard to kind of involve it into part of cost marketing. For employee engagement, majority of them are just looking at whether the course itself have enough engagement rates within the organization. Let's say if they have 100 employees and they created this opportunity, how many of them would actually participate in it? Right? Just the sign up rate itself is probably the simplest metrics they're looking at. So they're looking for something that kind of fit the employees in terms of timetable, in terms of their time commitment, right? In terms of proximity, right? Yeah. So I guess for most corporates, they don't really have that much of such a strong bias towards having a social impact kind of return on investment. They're looking more in terms of either internal employee engagement, retention kind of metrics, right? Or external branding perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. So in this case, the demographics of the types of volunteers you need to match the demographics in that particular corporate environment, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Then the other set of questions was all about getting the better being able to tap better into this growing pool of elderly volunteers. So and then in terms of data, then collecting data from them that are less tech savvy. So how do we kind of manage that? Maybe we can get Jess to address that. How would you what would you what kind of methods would you use for data collection from the elderly?
Sorry, it's Jess or Jeff?
Jess.
Okay, I mean, yes, but the thing is, we are also guiding the elderly now on the move to digitalization. You can see that actually a lot of things is getting digitalized, and how the government is actually supporting this, and even guiding the elderly on how to use some of the mobile phones to do simple transactions and all this. So it's in a way, if you can send a link over and it's just a button click, and like I say, it's like a skill. I think the elderly is okay, but what is the issue now is the scam. The thing is when you send out a link and tell them that, they will be like, oh, okay, is this a scam? Should I be doing it or what? That is what, not just the elderly. I can tell you most of the people now are like so skeptical about all this. So I think the communication is very, very important. So you communicate with the elderly or whoever volunteers they are trying to collect the data with, and tell them exact, I'm going to send you this at what time and all this, so that they are prepared and know that this thing is coming and all this. So my in a way, it's more of a communication. And of course, you can have a step-by-step guide when they actually come down to the center. You can actually even sit with them to help them to do the survey. That could be another one. I'm less of a paper and pen person, because that will involve a lot of manual work to translate the data back into the database and all this. So I'm more into engaging the elderly, working with them on how to fill in. You do it once, twice, the third time, they are on their own. I think that's good enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Conan, anything to add on that? Jess?
Me, right?
Yes.
Okay. About data collections, how can it be designed for elderly volunteers, those in the 50s and 60s? Because of the nature of the SOS role, thankfully, we need our volunteers to be IT savvy. No, thankfully, sorry, I erased that word. So our volunteers need to be IT savvy. So in a way, all the digitalized surveys works for them. But if you ask me, how data collections, the question is, can be designed that takes into considerations, right? My view is a bit similar to what Jess has mentioned. If let's say they are less IT savvy, actually it also depends on how you frame your survey. So for instance, for less IT savvy elderly, you cannot frame a very, very long survey. Yeah, you have to keep it very short, and you have to avoid like the technical language. If need to, you might need to use larger font. I'm not sure. Yeah. So because of their conditions. Yeah. So it depends on how you actually frame your survey. You can also balance between quantitative and qualitative. So for example, focus group discussion might help, small group dialogues, a more structured way of collecting informations. So that might work for them also. That's my personal view. Yeah. Mm.
Okay, I can see also the participants are helping to answer some of these questions. They're responding also. Thank you very much. Then now let's go on to tech area. There's also a few questions about VMS, how like using tech, the actual tech systems, platforms to help with data collection so that it's not manual like what Jess said. You spend a lot of time trying to transfer all the data. So maybe, Conan, I think that was the question for you, right? About like what systems you have used.
Yeah, we use, honestly, I feel like when it comes to tech tools, the best kind of situation is really when everything's integrated. So you don't have to like keep jumping across different platforms. That's probably when, you actually lose some data or like, make some mistakes and stuff like that. So yeah, for us, that's why we centralize all our data collection forms onto one tool. So that's something that is, I guess I would advise people to do. Not, don't like different departments use different things, that kind of thing, Yeah.
You Ming, what do you think? The technology bit collection.
Yeah, I think what Conan kind of hit the nail is essentially majority of data is lost because it's kind of fragmented across different systems, right? So ideally, you want to centralize the data together into, at least you collect it in one single place, you have a higher chance of using it, right? So I think the choice of tooling that you might want to adopt would have to be a little bit more holistic in terms of the need of organization. Most often times, I think we realize that majority of NGOs need roughly the same things. So a regular setup or maybe one or two of the VMS that I guess NCSS is kind of recommending is also good enough, right, to kind of suffice all the needs, right? Yeah. So once the data is collected, then there can be something that can be applied on top of it.
Exactly. Can I get that slide, Serena, if you can? Now we're talking about tech, right? NCSS actually has some funding for that. So via the Transformation Sustainability Scheme, so 80% funding, and specifically Part C, right? We have a pre-scoped green lane solution. So it's already there was already a pre-approved VMS, DMS, and an integrated DMS, VMS solution on the website. And there's also vendors that could help you. So if you're SSA that's just starting out trying to get a system running, collection, managing your volunteer management, please do take a look at these pages and email me or email sector capability, and we can keep talking to you about that. So this is more like just to get you guys a head start on collection. Yeah. Okay. Then let me go to the last question, which is, can the speakers just tell us one key takeaway that you want the participants to kind of remember from the session. Maybe we start with Jess.
Okay, I think most importantly, data actually doesn't really replace the heart of volunteering. So, but what it does is actually strengthen to ensure that our efforts are actually focused, inclusive, and impactful. Yeah,
Thank you, Jess. Okay, we go to Ming.
I guess from the biggest takeaway I would like to share is that tech and data is not scary. It's actually quite easy to implement. And there are many ready solutions, and NCSS has a lot of grants to support it as well. Yeah. So there's no reason not to do it.
Conan.
I would say start small. Don't be too scared to start anywhere, to be honest. And also echoing what Ming talked about, don't be afraid that there's no budget as well. NCSS is here.
Jess, last word.
My last word, my very powerful key takeaway is you want to work smarter rather than harder. Although you still need to work hard in order to work smarter. Yes, data mining can help you to work smarter.
Nice. Thank you so much for spending time and for spending time with us today, but also preparing your slides and having discussions with us. Thank you very much. So I'll hand you back to Janice.
Yeah, thank you so much to our 4 speakers for the engaging Q&A session. A big thank you to everyone who has joined us today. And as I shared, today concludes our Volunteer Management Network series. And we are also excited to hear from you what are the other topics that you'd like us to focus on as we plan for the next future sessions for our VM network sessions. So please help us to scan this QR code that you're seeing on the screen. It will just take you just 5 minutes. And we promise that we will take action on your feedback because we also want to organize events that can meet some of your curiosities and to help you improve your VM practices. Yeah, so thank you once again for joining us and see you again at our next NCSS event.